Mr Chope, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. Today's debate, against the backdrop as what has been such a disruptive and damaging year, where, as ever, it is the very youngest, the very oldest and the most vulnerable in our society who suffer when times are tough. So it's timely that we're having this debate today, as the Early Years Healthy Development Review that the Prime Minister asked me to chair is now gathering together its Phase 1 recommendations. And personally, I'm grateful for this chance to highlight what has been my real passion in politics for over 20 years. The first chapter in my early years story begins with OxPIP, a charity in Oxford providing psychotherapeutic support for families who are struggling to cope with their new baby. I got involved as a banker in writing a business plan for them and successfully applying for a substantial lottery grant. I very soon found myself chairing the charity, and that's when I learned the vital importance of the period from conception to the age of 2. I was actually introduced to OxPIP by my mum. She was a midwife and a trauma therapist, and she had seen firsthand how so many new parents have unspoken, appalling birth experiences or traumas in their personal lives that leave them unable to focus on their baby and that precious early bond. Having had my own brief experience of postnatal depression in 1995 with my firstborn, I could empathise with how hopeless and helpless you can feel as a new mum. Even with a loving partner and family around, those first few weeks can be frightening, sleep-deprived, and in many ways overwhelming. And statistics show that up to 1 in 7 women have this sort of experience after having a baby. It really is an invisible epidemic. So when I became the parliamentary candidate for South Northamptonshire in 2006, my family moved to the constituency and I set up NORPIP, the Northamptonshire sister charity to OxPIP, and then established PIP UK, a national charity that would lobby for better support in the early years and oversee a programme of building new PIPs around the country. I chaired PIP UK until I became a minister in 2014 and had to leave the role overnight, whereupon my very old friend, the Honourable Member for East Worthing and Shoreham, picked up that work. And I want to pay tribute to him today for all he has done for the PIP movement and for the first 1001 critical days. During my early years as a backbencher from 2010, I became chairman of the APPG on Sure Starts, set up the APPG on conception to age 2, and with support from cross-party colleagues such as Lord Field and the Honourable Member for Brighton Pavilion, I launched the first 1001 Critical Days manifesto in 2013. Under the leadership of my honourable friend for East Worthing and Shoreham, PIP UK has become the Parent Infant Foundation, and the 1001 Critical Days manifesto has become a movement with the support of over 160 charities and professional organisations. There is no doubt that there is overwhelming support from the early years sector for significant government action. And that opportunity is now, as we build back better and with personal backing from the Prime Minister himself. So, Mr Chope, how does the first 1001 days shape a baby's lifelong potential? Well, from conception to the age of 2, a secure and loving relationship between baby and carer literally shapes the way the baby's brain develops. It's where the building blocks for lifelong physical and emotional health are laid out. And like a sponge, the developing brain will soak up the sense that the world is a good place and that problems can be solved. Humans are unique in the animal kingdom in the extent of their underdevelopment at birth. What other animal cannot walk until it's a year old and cannot fend for itself in any other way until it is at least 2 years old? And the physical underdevelopment is only a small part of the story. The human brain is itself only partially formed when you're born, with billions of undifferentiated neurons and parts of the brain that are yet to exist. At birth and in the precious months that follow, a baby has no cognitive skills. It can only cry, sleep, or look around. Its neural connections are stimulated by the loving attention of its carer and the world around it, making it so important for future development and secure attachment. Those here with children will all remember walking up and down the landing in the middle of the night with baby in their arms saying, "Go to sleep, go to sleep." We wind them, we change them, we feed them. And all of this comes naturally to most parents. That baby, whose basic needs are met, learns that the world is a good place, and they retain this instinct throughout their life. The baby who develops secure attachment will grow up able to cope with life's ups and downs. They will develop speech skills. They'll be able to pay attention in school, to make friends, to hold down a job, and then to go on to become a good enough parent themselves. But on the other hand, a baby who is ignored, neglected, or abused will find life much harder, and in the most extreme cases of abuse, there will be a severe impact on the developing brain. A baby cannot regulate his or her own feelings, and if their needs are not met, will cry, and that cry will get more and more persistent, and if no help comes, that baby will eventually take refuge in sleep. And we know that a baby left continually to scream, days and weeks on end, will experience raised levels of the stress hormone, cortisol. And we also know that excessive amounts of this can damage the baby's immune system with lifelong physical and emotional health implications. This damage can happen in the womb itself, and there is strong evidence to suggest that high risk-taking behaviours evidenced in adults have a link to a high tolerance to raised stress levels that started in the earliest years. We know that a pregnant woman who suffers from stress produces more cortisol, and the more stressed the mother, the more the fetus is exposed to higher levels of the chemical. This exposure can lead to modifications in gene expressions whilst the child's brain is still developing. So a baby's brain development has deep implications for society. And we know that a human being without a properly developed social brain will find it difficult to empathise with others, to regulate his or her emotions, and this will make it harder to cope with life's stresses, as well as with building and keeping relationships in later life. We've seen the lack of human connection at its most extreme, particularly in the case of the Romanian orphans under Ceausescu's regime. Their minimal physical and emotional contact left them profoundly and permanently damaged. We sadly know that long-term violence, self-harm, poor mental health and substance misuse have roots stemming back to the earliest experiences in childhood. So, Mr. Chope, what you do with a baby from conception to the age of 2 is about building the human and emotional capacity of that infant. And what you do after the age of 2 is going to be about trying to reverse damage that has already been done. In the words of the Royal Foundation, the early years are the most important time of life to set out the building blocks for a human being's future development and success. And I truly applaud the Duchess of Cambridge for her passion to ensure that every baby gets the best start in life. It's indisputable, colleagues, it is utterly indisputable that the first 1,001 days is the most crucial period of human development. And I want to set out where we are now. I chaired an IMG on the early years between 2018 and 2019 under the premiership of my right honourable friend for Maidenhead. That group made some key recommendations, the main one of which is that the government should set out and identify a vision for the first 1,001 critical days. Our current Prime Minister has always been a supporter of greater help for new families, and during many cabinet meetings and conversations over several years, his commitment has always been clear. So I was delighted when earlier this year he asked me to chair the Early Years Healthy Development Review on behalf of the government. The review has 3 advisory groups, parliamentary, practitioners and academics, utilising the knowledge, experience and passion of colleagues across both houses and across the early years sector. Lockdown has prevented any physical visits, so instead our group has taken part in a series of virtual visits, meeting with parents, health professionals and service providers in Camden, Devon, Stoke, Leeds, Essex, Newcastle and others. We've had a series of deep dives looking into and hearing from professionals and stakeholders on everything from breastfeeding to parenting apps to parental mental health. We've engaged with parents and carers through a questionnaire that's gathered over 3,500 responses, and a personal favourite of mine has been the Mumsnet thread that I've logged into every week to chat with new mums. We're now at the point of bringing together the review's recommendations with a view to communicating those at the end of January. And I don't want to spoil that by talking about those recommendations right now, but there are a few key learning points that I want to raise today, because I'm sorry to say that during the lockdown there has been much suffering, and much of that's come to the review's attention. We've heard troubling stories of isolation, with partners unable to be at health checks, and even to stay with mum and baby after the delivery. Parents have experienced limited FaceTime with health visitors, and disastrously, there's been a rise in cases of domestic violence. There were 500,000 babies born during the first lockdown alone. And with 1,800 babies born every single day in England, far too many have entered a world of isolation and limited social contact. There have been few cuddles with granny and granddad, much less support for mums and dads, and barely any time spent with other babies. And if a baby's potential for good lifelong health and well-being is derived from their earliest experiences, then surely we need to make sure that every new family is now getting the best possible support. That's why it's vital that once the vaccine is rolled out and we start to get our lives back to a sense of normality, we improve and increase the care given to new families who've had such a tough year. But despite the troubling stories, there have also been some silver linings that we mustn't lose sight of. One I would particularly like to highlight is the use of digital and remote support. Many parents have said that during lockdown, they've really valued being able to text or have a Zoom call with their GP or health visitor on a much faster timescale than an in-person appointment would have been. Some mums have told the review that they preferred remote breastfeeding support to a physical group setting, and those that have taken advantage of mental health therapies online have felt it has been a positive step forward. This rapid adaptation to change has pushed open the door for the possibilities of technology in backing up good face-to-face support for new parents. Another silver lining is the better join-up of services. From family centre workers to health visitors, from midwives to mental health therapists, professionals have found getting together on a Zoom call to discuss how to better support a family has been a vast improvement to their working practice, and one that they don't want to lose. And whilst the pandemic is not yet over, and until the vaccine has been rolled out sufficiently, there will still be the need to remember hands, face, space. I do want to call on the Minister to think about what more can be done for those 1,800 babies being born every single day. 1 in 7 women suffer postnatal depression, and up to 1 in 10 new dads. And that was even before lockdown. We can only begin to imagine how many more families are struggling today. So I urge the Minister to consider allowing new families at least 2 other supporting family members to bubble with them, or 2 other individuals if they're a lone parent. And I would also encourage her to make sure that health visitors and early years health services remain available and accessible face-to-face for everybody. The strength of feeling of those here today, of sector stakeholders, and importantly of parents, gives me the confidence that we can create real change in the early years and make sure that every baby gets the best start in life. For me, it's been a long journey, more than 20 years, to reach this point. And I want to thank all those colleagues across both houses who've committed themselves to this agenda. And I also want to thank the hundreds of thousands of people across this country who, through their professional careers or through volunteering, are day in, day out supporting the next generation. And finally, I'd like to end my remarks with a thought by Nelson Mandela, who is a bit of a hero of mine. As he said, "Children are our greatest treasure. They are our future." Mr. Chope, the actions that we take in the present will help to shape not only the future of the youngest in society, but the outcomes of generations to come. Thank you.